I tried to turn my back to that, but I just didn't want to share him. Simple as that. As much as he wanted to be married and didn't want to share him. Simple as that. As much as he wanted to be married and have a family, I don't know if he was ever cut to be married. I was only 14, actually only 3 months into 14, and visited him at his home.
Because he was a superstar.
Of course, my God, he was at the top
And he was
of his
24.
game. He was 24 years old, yeah.
At 80 years old, Priscilla Presley has finally revealed the truth. Elvis wasn't just her husband. He was the only man she ever truly loved. When Priscilla Presley recently turned 80, the world listened closely as she finally opened up about something she had carried in her heart for decades, why Elvis Presley was her one and only true love. Her words were not the polished lines of a Hollywood interview, nor the carefully staged answers of a press conference. They were honest, tender, and filled with the kind of raw truth that can only come after a lifetime of holding on to a memory that never fades. To understand why Elvis remained the love of her life, we need to go back to where it all began. Priscilla was just 14 years old when she first met Elvis in Germany. He was already a global sensation, the king of rock and roll, admired and desired by millions. Yet in that moment, he wasn't just a superstar. He was a lonely young man, stationed with the US Army, far from home, missing the life he had left behind. Priscilla described that first meeting as something she could never forget. She remembered the way he looked at her, not as a child, but as someone who truly understood the loneliness he felt. Elvis, despite his fame, longed for connection, for someone who would listen without judgment. And Priscilla, young and wide-eyed, gave him that. She listened, she cared, and in that simple act, a bond was formed, one that would outlast everything else. Over the years, people questioned their relationship. Some criticized the age difference, others doubted it would ever last. But what no one on the outside could see was the depth of their emotional connection. Elvis opened up to Priscilla in ways he never did with others. She became his safe place, his anchor, his reminder that behind all the fame and chaos, he was still just a man searching for love. When she spoke at 80, Priscilla made it clear it wasn't about the glitz, the fame, or the music. It was about who Elvis was when the lights went out and the world wasn't watching. To her, he wasn't just the king. He was vulnerable, sensitive, funny, and sometimes broken. She loved the man, not the legend. Priscilla admitted that even though their marriage ended, the love never did. Divorce didn't mean the end of devotion. It only meant the circumstances around them had become too heavy to carry. The world expected too much of Elvis, and the pressure seeped into their marriage. But her heart, she confessed, never truly let him go. That's why even now, decades after his passing, she speaks of him not with regret, but with gratitude for being the great love of her life. What made her confession so powerful was not just the story of a young girl swept into the world of a music icon. It was the way she still spoke of him as if he had left the room only yesterday. At 80, she showed the world that some loves don't fade with time, they only grow stronger. Priscilla Presley's life was forever shaped by Elvis, long after their marriage ended. When she reflected at 80, she admitted that every major decision, every turning point, carried his shadow. Not in a way that held her back, but in a way that reminded her how deeply he had been woven into the fabric of her life. When she first moved to Graceland, she was just a teenager stepping into a world of glamour, music, and fame that most could never imagine. But it wasn't just the house, the cars, or the screaming fans. It was the overwhelming reality that her life would never be ordinary again. Living with Elvis meant living in two worlds, one where he was the king to millions, and one where he was simply the man she loved. Balancing those two identities was not easy, but it shaped the woman she became. Priscilla revealed that Elvis taught her how to see life differently. He showed her passion, intensity, and the power of following your dreams no matter what people say. But he also exposed her to the darker side of fame, the constant pressure, the endless expectations, and the loneliness that comes with being adored by millions but truly known by very few. She admitted that even after their divorce, she couldn't escape his presence. Every choice she made, whether in business, family, or relationships, was influenced by the lessons she learned from him. Some people wondered why she never remarried, and at 80 she finally gave the answer. No one could ever replace Elvis, not because others weren't kind or loving, but because the connection they shared was so unique that it left no space for anyone else. He wasn't just her husband, He was the defining love of her life. Even in her role as the keeper of his legacy, Priscilla has always walked a fine line. She wasn't just preserving Elvis for the fans, she was protecting the man she knew behind closed doors. She wanted the world to remember him not only as the dazzling performer, but as the gentle soul who loved deeply, who cared for his family, and who struggled silently with the weight of his crown. Her decision to remain so closely tied to Elvis's memory wasn't just about duty, it was about love, a love that never expired, even as the years passed and the world moved on. She admitted that sometimes in quiet moments she still felt his presence. Sometimes it was in the music, sometimes in the walls of Graceland, sometimes in the laughter of their daughter, Lisa Marie. For Priscilla, Elvis wasn't gone, he was always with her. And that perhaps is why she calls him her only true love, because true love doesn't end when life does. It lingers, it shapes, it guides. And at 80, Priscilla Presley finally let the world see that for her, Elvis wasn't just the great love of her youth. He was, and always will be, the great love of her entire life. Even after Priscilla and Elvis divorced in 1973, their connection never truly ended. For most people, divorce means distance, a quiet separation, and a gradual fading from each other's lives. But for Priscilla and Elvis, it was different. Their bond had been forged through years of passion, sacrifice, and shared struggles. It wasn't the kind of love that could simply be cut off by legal papers. Priscilla often spoke about how, even after the divorce, Elvis would call her at unexpected hours. Sometimes it was late at night, sometimes early in the morning. His voice carried the same charm, the same mix of vulnerability and command that had once swept her away as a teenager. He would talk to her about music, about Graceland, or sometimes about nothing in particular, just needing someone who understood him. And Priscilla, no matter where she was or what she was doing, always answered. She later admitted that a part of her still felt responsible for Elvis, as if she were one of the few people in the world who truly knew his soul. There were tender moments too. Even after they went their separate ways, Priscilla and Elvis continued to share meals together, laugh about old memories, and spend time as a family with their daughter, Lisa Marie. Priscilla once recalled that Elvis could make her laugh like no one else. His humor was quick, sometimes mischievous, but always disarming. In those moments, she said, it was easy to forget the pain of their breakup and remember the man she had fallen in love with, the one who sang to her, wrote her notes, and pulled her into his world with such intensity. Priscilla also revealed that Elvis never stopped calling her Scylla. That little nickname, said in his soft drawl, reminded her of the intimacy they once shared. It was proof that even in the midst of fame, chaos, and new relationships, Elvis kept her in a special corner of his heart. And for Priscilla, those small details meant everything. But it wasn't just about the past. Even in practical ways, they remained partners. Priscilla helped Elvis with important decisions, offering advice on matters he sometimes couldn't trust others with. And Elvis, despite his flaws, leaned on her wisdom more than he admitted. She later said that while their marriage didn't survive, their respect for each other did, and that respect became the foundation of their lifelong bond. This enduring connection also shaped the way Priscilla saw love. She confessed that after Elvis, every relationship felt different, almost incomplete, not because she didn't care for others, but because no one else carried the same weight in her heart. Elvis wasn't just a chapter of her life, he was the story. Looking back, Priscilla admitted she couldn't truly let go of Elvis because their lives had been so tightly woven together. They had shared their youth, their dreams, and their mistakes. She had seen his rise to stardom up close, watched him charm millions, and witnessed his private struggles when the spotlight dimmed. She had been there when he was just Elvis, not the king, and that made her love unique. Their bond was far from perfect. It was full of highs and lows, joy and heartbreak. But in the end, it was a love story that refused to fade. And Priscilla, even decades later, said she never once doubted that Elvis remained her one true love. After Elvis, Priscilla did try to move on. She dated, she built a life, and she even had long-term relationships. But no matter how far she went, Elvis was always there, like a shadow that followed her, silently shaping her choices. She once admitted that being with Elvis set a standard no one else could ever meet. It wasn't about money or fame, though Elvis had both. It was about the way he made her feel. Elvis had this unique power to make Priscilla feel like the center of his universe, even in a crowded room filled with adoring fans. He could glance at her from across the stage, and in that one look, she felt seen in a way no one else could replicate. Other men tried, of course. They brought her gifts, they showered her with attention, but something was always missing. Priscilla explained that she often compared them to Elvis without even realizing it. Did they have his charm, his depth, his ability to make her laugh until her sides hurt? The answer was always no. And so, even in relationships that lasted years, she often felt a quiet emptiness because they weren't Elvis. She also spoke about how Elvis influenced the way she saw herself. Being loved by someone so iconic gave her confidence, but it also created a weight she carried. After all, how could anyone else compete with the king? In a way, Priscilla was trapped by the very love that defined her. It was beautiful, but it also made moving forward incredibly difficult. Priscilla was honest about her struggles. She admitted that at times, she pushed people away because she knew they could never measure up. And while she did care for them, she couldn't give them her whole heart. A part of her remained with Elvis, tucked away in memories of Graceland, in the echo of his laughter, and in the soft way he said her name. Even in interviews decades later, she would speak about Elvis with a warmth and emotion that made it clear he was never far from her mind. Her eyes softened, her voice grew quieter, and suddenly it was as if she was back in the 1960s, a young woman caught up in a love story larger than life. It wasn't just about romance either. Elvis had shaped her view of family, loyalty, and devotion. No one else could take his place in those roles, which is why she always returned to him in her heart. When asked if she ever found another true love, Priscilla answered with quiet honesty, "No, Elvis was it." That confession said it all. Every love after Elvis was measured against him, and none ever compared. He was her first love, her deepest love, and the love that stayed with her even when he was gone. For Priscilla, it wasn't about clinging to the past. It was about acknowledging a truth she could never escape. Elvis Presley was her only true love. And at 80 years old, she finally said it out loud, not with regret, but with gratitude for having experienced something so rare and unforgettable. When Elvis Presley passed away in August of 1977, the world was shaken. Millions mourned the loss of the king of rock and roll. But for Priscilla Presley, that day marked something far deeper, a personal heartbreak that words could never truly capture. She wasn't just the ex-wife of Elvis. She was the one who had seen the most vulnerable sides of him, the one who grew up in his shadow, who shared his home, his laughter, his struggles. When news came that Elvis had died at just 42, Priscilla was devastated. Even though their marriage had ended years earlier, the bond between them was still unbreakable. Priscilla once shared how she felt when she got the call. Her knees buckled, her heart sank, and the world went silent. She described it as losing not just Elvis, but a part of herself. For years, she carried the grief like a silent weight. She couldn't go back to Graceland without feeling the pain. Every corner of the house reminded her of him, the laughter in the living room, the music drifting from the piano, the sound of his footsteps. In the months after his death, Priscilla had to face something no one could prepare her for, a world without Elvis. Fans from around the globe gathered at Graceland, leaving flowers, letters, and candles, and Priscilla realized something powerful. Elvis didn't just belong to her, he belonged to the world. His fans were heartbroken too, but they looked to her for strength, for guidance, for some way to keep his memory alive. That's when Priscilla made one of the most important decisions of her life. Instead of letting grief consume her, she dedicated herself to protecting Elvis's legacy. She turned Graceland into a place where fans could come and feel his spirit. She worked tirelessly to ensure that Elvis would never be forgotten, that his music and his memory would live on for generations. But even as she became the guardian of his legacy, her own heart remained marked by the loss. Unlike others, she couldn't simply remember Elvis as an icon. She remembered him as the man she once loved, the man who once held her hand, who whispered his dreams and fears when no one else was around. For Priscilla, every tribute, every song played on the radio, every fan's tearful story about Elvis was a reminder of what she had lost. And while the world knew Elvis as a superstar, she knew him as her first love. And that, she admitted, was something she could never replace. Years later, she explained that even though their marriage had ended, she never stopped caring about him. Elvis was always a part of her life, and his death left a void that no one else could fill. Other relationships came and went, but none of them touched her heart in the way Elvis did. This chapter of her life was filled with both pain and purpose. Pain, because she had lost the love of her youth. Purpose, because she was determined to keep his spirit alive. And as time passed, Priscilla became more than just the woman who once loved Elvis. She became the voice that carried his memory into the future. It was through this heartbreak that she truly understood the depth of her love for him. Even in death, Elvis remained the one she could never forget. Over the years, many people have asked Priscilla why she never found another love as powerful as the one she shared with Elvis. She dated other men, yes. She had relationships after their divorce, but whenever she spoke about them, it became clear none of them could compare to Elvis. Why? The answer lies in the unique story they shared. Priscilla met Elvis when she was just a young girl, and he was already a star. Their relationship was unlike anything else, built in a world of fame, music, and intensity that most people could never imagine. Elvis wasn't just her husband. He was her teacher, her protector, her greatest influence. He introduced her to the world, shaped her style, her confidence, and even the way she carried herself. To Priscilla, Elvis was more than a partner. He was the man who opened her heart to love. Every laugh, every secret, every moment of tenderness they shared became etched in her memory. And because he was her first true love, no one else could ever take his place. She admitted in interviews that she tried to move on, but she always found herself comparing others to Elvis. And no matter how kind, successful, or charming they were, no one could match the way Elvis made her feel. He had a charisma, a presence, an energy that was impossible to replicate. Even with his flaws, Elvis remained the one she loved most deeply. He wasn't perfect. He struggled with fame, with his health, with the pressures of being an icon. But to Priscilla, that made him human. And because she had seen both his greatness and his weakness, her love for him was complete and real. Priscilla also explained something profound. Love like theirs doesn't happen twice. It was once in a lifetime. When you share your youth, your dreams, and your entire world with someone, that person leaves an imprint on your soul. And for her, that imprint was Elvis. At 80, when people asked her why she still spoke of him with such emotion, her answer was simple. Elvis was her only true love, not because she never cared for anyone else, but because the connection they shared was beyond ordinary love. It was a bond written in the stars, a bond that survived divorce, distance, and even death. She said that even now, when she hears his songs, she feels him close. When she sees his picture, it's not the superstar she remembers, but the man who once kissed her goodnight. For Priscilla, Elvis was more than history. He was a part of her heart that time could never erase. In the end, Priscilla's story is not just about being the ex-wife of a legend. It's about the kind of love that defines a lifetime. The kind that people spend their whole lives searching for. And for her, that love was Elvis. He wasn't just the king of rock and roll. He was her king, her first love, her last love, and the only man who could truly claim her heart. Priscilla Presley is 80 years old now. Decades have passed since her life with Elvis, yet her heart still circles back to him. She has often said in interviews that her bond with Elvis was unlike anything she's ever felt again. It wasn't just about fame or music or being married to the most famous man in the world. It was something deeper, something spiritual. She explains that Elvis could make her feel seen in a way no one else ever has. Even when he was surrounded by crowds, fans, and flashing cameras, Elvis had this ability to look directly into her eyes and make her feel like she was the only person in the room. That's rare, that's powerful, and for Priscilla, it was unforgettable. After their divorce, and even after Elvis's tragic passing, she did try to move forward. She raised their daughter Lisa Marie with strength and grace. She explored other relationships, friendships, and moments of happiness. But deep inside, she says there was always a space in her heart that belonged only to Elvis. It wasn't something anyone else could fill, no matter how hard she tried. And that's what makes her confession at 80 so emotional. She finally said out loud what many had suspected all along, that Elvis was, and always would be, her only true love. Not because she didn't care for others, not because she didn't want to find lasting happiness, but because what she shared with Elvis was one of those rare connections that happen only once in a lifetime. It's easy to look at their story and focus on the challenges, the fame, the distance, the mistakes. But when you listen to Priscilla speak now, what stands out isn't the pain. It's the love. A love that outlived the struggles, the years apart, and even Elvis's death. And that's why her words strike such a chord today. At 80, she isn't speaking with the excitement of a young woman in love. She's speaking with the wisdom of someone who has lived, who has loved, and who knows exactly what mattered most in her life. For her, it wasn't the Hollywood parties, the luxury, or the spotlight. It was Elvis, always Elvis. And if you've watched this far, I want to ask you, do you believe that kind of love still exists today? The kind that never fades, no matter what? Let me know your thoughts in the comments below. And if you want to hear more untold love stories from the lives of iconic stars, make sure to subscribe. Because there's so much more to share, and I don't want you to miss it.